Hi, I'm Holly. I'm your friendly regional grants manager, and I am here to talk to you about what happens when you don't get the grant. Um, and I'm coming to you all by myself because we actually had a lovely Zoom meeting, and some people did attend last night, but I forgot to hit record. So instead, you're going to get my monologue. Sorry about that. But I did write down questions that people asked, and I can incorporate that into what I'm going to talk about today. So, this is my pep talk video, okay? And sometimes you need one when you haven't gotten the grant. So, this is about what to do when you don't get the grant, okay? And my number one thing is do not despair, okay? I know, especially when we're applying for a grant as an individual artist, um, that not getting that grant can feel really devastating. And you can feel really judged. Um, you know, most of us who create art because we're driven to, we're compelled to. It's a big part of who we are. It's a big part of our soul. It's very important in our lives. We're passionate about it. And so when you've applied to receive a grant as an artist and you've put your work out there on the line, those work samples, those awards that you won, that resume and bio that you worked so hard on, um, and then you don't get the grant, it can feel really tough. It can feel devastating. You can feel judged. And I'm saying, please try not to go there if you can. Don't despair. Because I'm here to tell you, as a grants manager who has seen a lot of applications come and go for individual artists as well as organizations or artists who are trying to fund a project, that most of the time that you don't get the grant, it isn't about you. So don't look at this as a judgment on your art or on your personal style, your creativity, your culture, your gender, your age. Those are probably not the reasons that you didn't get this grant. There are lots of reasons why your application might not have scored high enough to be awarded. Um, Often, um, maybe you were ineligible. At Region 2 Arts Council, we do try and, let you know as soon as possible if you are ineligible. And we send out an email right away, way before the grant review panel actually happens. Because the first thing I do when we close the applications is I read them to make sure that they are eligible. And if they're found ineligible, I try and let you know right away so that you're no longer worrying about it and so that you know right up front what it was and why you were ineligible. So I'll put the reason in there. But there are lots of reasons why you might not be ineligible or you might not be eligible for something that you've applied for. And not all funders are this transparent. Not all funders necessarily have the staff to track down everybody who is ineligible. I mean, we usually get between 7 and maybe 50 applications for any one um, grant uh, opportunity. But, at the state level, they get hundreds of applications. And at the federal level, they might get thousands or even tens of thousands of applications. And so they might not have enough staff to track them all down. And some of them just might go in the garbage because they're ineligible and they don't necessarily give you the feedback and let you know that you were ineligible. That might be something that you want to track down, if you're worried that that might have been the case. Um, but it does happen, and even small family foundations, sometimes they don't contact people because they might have a staff of one. They might have a part-time staff of two, who each work 10 hours a week. Um, so, not everybody gets back to you and lets you know that you're ineligible. So it could be that, it could be that you didn't live in their service area. Um, you weren't the proper demographic. Maybe this was a special grant program for veterans, for indigenous peoples, for disabled artists, for BIPOC artists. You want to pay attention to that. Make sure you read the guidelines and just so you don't waste your time. You don't want to apply for something you're ineligible for. If you're an organization, maybe you're not a 501(c)(3. Maybe you're not a school. Maybe you're not, a sovereign tribal nation. Maybe that's part of, what they were looking for in applicants. So, you know, make sure you read those guidelines so you know if you're eligible or not. And that way you don't waste your time. You don't want to waste your time because we all know how much time and work goes into writing these grant applications, right? I mean, like I said, you put your heart and soul in there and your blood, sweat, and tears type of thing. I mean, you really do. It takes hours, and sometimes days and weeks, depending on who you're applying with, to get these applications together, to gather all those documents, to write all the answers to all the questions, to make that budget. It's a big time investment, and more and more in modern society, we just don't have time. Maybe we have like little tiny increments of time, but we don't have like hours worth, and so you want to read those eligibility guidelines so that you don't, waste your time by applying for something that you weren't eligible for. But that is one of the reasons, perhaps, why you weren't granted is maybe you were ineligible and they didn't let you know. That happens. So be aware of that. Or it could be maybe you just didn't fit the criteria to begin with. Maybe your activity didn't reflect the values of the funder. I mean, usually funders have a mission and they grant out to other organizations or individuals who are doing something that furthers that mission. So, maybe you had a really great idea and an amazing thing that you want to do, but it wasn't about the environment, and this funder is all about the environment. It could be as simple as that. Maybe your activity happens outside the funder service area. So although your organization or your address is inside their service area, maybe the people that you were going to service outside of their service area. That sometimes happens. Um, Maybe your activity doesn't engage the people the demographic that they're trying to hit with their funding. Maybe your activity doesn't engage children or elders or youth at risk or whatever it is. So those are things that you need to pay attention to. You need to pay attention to detail. You need to pay attention to definitions. Um, like mid-career artist. A lot of foundations and arts funders, um, they will fund mid-career artists, but each of them has a different definition for what mid-career artist is. Sometimes mid-career artist can mean that you've been doing your art for at least 5 years. And sometimes mid-career artist can mean that you have to have um, awards, and you have to have had a residency somewhere, and you have to have had at least 10 years of experience, and you have to have had a solo show or a solo performance, or which maybe other people would think that's more of an advanced artist. And people who might look at this might be like, well, 5 years that you've been doing your art, I've been doing my art 30 years. You're just a beginning artist. So paying attention to what they say the definition is really important, because it changes from funder to funder. So it could be that could be the reason why you weren't funded. Um, and then there's always the competition, grants are a competition. You are writing in applications, but lots of other organizations or artists are also writing in applications. And other applications out competed yours. And it might not necessarily be because their art is so much better or their idea is so much better. Maybe it's because they have more partners. Maybe they're serving more people. Maybe they're in a more rural place than you are. Maybe they're in a less rural place than you are. I mean, there's lots of reasons why that could happen too. And you never know how many applications they've received, you know for our programs at the Region 2 Arts Council, you might be at the most 1 out of 50. And it's more likely that you're 1 out of 20 applying. But, at the state level, you could be 1 out of 378. And, funding runs out. We don't have funding to fund every single person most of the time. And so, maybe there were 378 applications, but only funding enough for 5, you know? It happens. And so, it's very possible that if you saw the list of people who weren't funded as well as you might be like, oh, that's an artist that's really inspired me. That's somebody who taught me. That's somebody who I really venerate and respect in what they do. And they didn't get funded either. I mean, when they're only funding 5 people, and they've had hundreds of applications, a lot of people lose out. Almost everybody. So, remember that. Remember that when you're kind of, feeling judged and down in the dumps. Do not despair. That was the start of this. That was my heading. That was my initial thought here. Do not despair, because often those are the kinds of realities that you're dealing with here, and it might not have anything to do with your art as much as with volume. And you know, there's uh there's just so many reasons why you might not have been funded. Maybe you were competing against veteran artists with more experience, or against large organizations with budgets and paid staff. Um, those things are smart to know about, I mean, I know that you've already put so much work into an application, but putting work into the research, make sure that you write smart applications that you're more likely to get funded by. You're not wasting your time with organizations that aren't going to be interested in funding what you're doing, or organizations that you are not actually uh, you know eligible for, or with organizations that fund so few that you almost have to, it's like a lottery win when you make it. Maybe try and find a funder where the funding ratio is more in your favor. So, please be aware of that. And then also, there are other reasons besides your art that your application might not be funded. And, maybe the review panel misunderstood you, or your activity. It happens. Sometimes it's really hard to describe what you do. I mean, not every art form and every technique is the same. If your art form or technique are really, really unique, they might be really hard to explain, and you might have to work harder than somebody else who's doing something that's much more common. You might have to work much harder to explain what you do because it's not something that people have seen before. Um, you know, maybe it has nothing to do with your art at all, though. I mean, there's so many things. It could be that there's specific information that the review panel expected to see that was missing. Maybe you skipped over something that they were expressly expecting to see that's part of the criteria they judge. Um, maybe your budget had the tiniest math error, but everybody else's budget didn't have a math error. I mean, it comes down to things like that, and it's more likely something like that than it is you. So, remember that. Maybe you provided short answers or too few details. Those details are important. You need to take time and describe the things that you're doing and the kind of art that you do so that the review panel can understand it. The resume or the artist statement you provided maybe weren't appropriate or weren't in the specific format that they expected. Maybe your work samples didn't work, so they couldn't really judge what you do. um, Oftentimes, even with our grants, it's very common practice for funders to not allow you to change anything in your application once it has been submitted. Once it has been submitted and hit the submission deadline, there's no contact until you are awarded or not awarded. And that's very common practice. So you don't necessarily get the feedback that your links didn't work. So always check your links and make sure they work and make sure they work for everybody. Um, you know, uh, Often, and this is tough for me because I can't contact people back. It's part of our process that we do not contact people when their links don't work. And um sometimes you forget how long the grant process is. And our grant process, believe it or not, is actually pretty short compared to, say, like a state process or a larger funder. Sometimes they can have, timelines, and it's going to take 6 months for you to even know whether you got funded. Sometimes it's going to take a whole year before you find out if you were funded. And so you have to make sure that that link is live for a whole 6 months or a year. And even with our short turnaround, I mean, we usually let you know within a couple of months of the deadline, um, whether you've been funded or not. Um, but even in that short time, even 2 weeks after the deadline, sometimes people have taken down their work samples. And if you take down your work sample, it's gone. I have nothing. The people have nothing to look at. The review panel can't see your work samples because you took them down because you forgot that it's going to take 2 months or 6 months or whatever it is. And that happens. And sometimes, you forget that not everybody has a Google account to be able to log in and see something on Google. Not everybody has a Dropbox account to be able to log in and see something on Dropbox or on um, whatever the Microsoft Office thing is. So there's a lot of different proprietary software that you might use for your links that might need a login to be able to see it. Even YouTube. I mean, if you haven't made an unlisted video where it's a URL and anybody can access that URL, um, they might not be able to see it. Sometimes people share things with me, to my email address. So then, they've shared it to my email address and I can view it, but nobody else on the panel can see it. And I'm not going to give my login to everybody on the panel. So, cuz it's my email. So, those are things that are hard to take into consideration because you don't see the behind the scenes. But those things happen. Um just be aware of that. It's possible that you missed something. Maybe you didn't include a budget or work samples or a resume. Those things happen. You know, um, then and that kind of takes me into the next part of see what you can learn. But first, I do want to say that, as I said before, I understand that it's really hard and an arduous and time consuming process to apply for a grant. And I understand that when you don't get that grant, it can be devastating. And I just want to say, take care of yourself. Do what you need to do to shake this off. Grieve if you need to grieve for this dream that you had that maybe didn't quite make it this time, but don't give up. Um, you know, Make some art. Hang out with friends who know and love you. Get inspired by other artists or nature or family or whatever, really does it for you. I don't know, say affirmations in the mirror until you believe them. Whatever you need to do to get ready and get up, dust yourself off and get back on that horse, so to speak. I mean, I know that's a cliche, but it's true. And go find those other opportunities because there is funding out there for everyone if you look, but you have to find the funding that fits for you and utilize your time to best purpose. And that can be hard sometimes, but you can do this. You can do this. So maybe the number one next thing to do is, like I said, see what you can learn. So first of all, do not despair. Second of all, see what you can learn. So, um, you know, if they allow you to, the funder, make sure that you listen in during the review. Okay. So if that's an option that the funder offers, make sure that you do that. Listen in during the review. And that's something that we offer at the Region 2 Arts Council. So when you apply for a grant, usually the day before the review panel is going to happen, I send you a link to the Zoom for the review panel. And you can tune in and watch the whole entire panel. And you not only get comments about your application, but you also hear what is said about the other applications and you get an idea of what kind of other applications were out there, what kind of things the other artists or other organizations were asking for funds for. And so we open up this process, to be transparent, but also as a learning experience for grant writers. Um, so if your funder offers something like that, take them up on it and go see at least your grant, at least experience your grant application and what the panel has to say about it. But if you can, stay for the whole thing and hear about the other ones as well. I think it's a really, really good learning experience. But not all funders do this. But if they only send you, like the comments on your application, like Minnesota State Arts Board, of course, they don't have just one panel because they have, hundreds of applications that come in. And so they have multiple panels because they can't ask one panel to read 500 applications. It's just too much. Who can sit down and read 500 applications? That's a lot of work, especially when it's volunteer work. So, they usually cut it down to like maybe 30 applications. So each panel reads 30 applications and then they have multiple panels. So it would be difficult for you to be able to hear them all. But they usually cut it down to what was said about your specific application, and they send you an audio file, and you can listen to it. And other funders, sometimes they will send you comments, in your denial letter, letting you know you didn't get the funding. They'll give you some of the comments there sometimes, but sometimes, they don't automatically share them with you. So contact the funder for comments. If they don't automatically share them with you, contact them and find out what was said about your grant application. If nothing else, sometimes it might make you feel a little bit better, to know that everything they said about your application was positive, and you didn't get the application not because or didn't get the funds not because they didn't like your application, um, or that they didn't like you or that they didn't like your art, but just because other applications outcompeted yours. And like I said, maybe, there were hundreds of applications and they're only giving out 5 awards. So, you know, um, that happens. And it's sometimes it's important to know that. Or sometimes it's important to know if you made, like an error that made a big difference, that you could correct. Like I said, before, maybe your links to your work samples didn't work. Maybe you had a tiny budget error. Those are things that you want to know because those are things that are easily fixable. So if they don't automatically share comments with you, ask about them because you need to know how you and your art, or your proposed arts activity were perceived. The information will help you apply for the next grant opportunity with that funder or the next funder, a different funder. Um, and you can become a better grant writer by learning. So contact them. You need to hear, what you forgot to tell them or what you forgot to include or any mistakes you made. You need to hear what you did right and what the panel really liked so that you can utilize that again when you apply to this funder or a different funder. And like I was saying, you can also learn from what others have applied for or how their applications were perceived. If the funder allows you to listen and observe, theirs as well. Not all funders do, but we do. So if you apply for our grants, that's something that you might want to try and make time for. Um, and honestly, make sure to stay in touch with funders you've applied to, even if you didn't get the grant, like use an email or phone that you check often. I don't know how many times I've had people um, apply for a grant with us and they set up a specific email just for this grant application, just for this grant award. And then they don't check that application. You know, they don't look into and check the email because it's an email just for this purpose. And they might miss our offer for funding. So it's important to stay in touch with your funders and make sure that you use an email or phone number or however they're contacting you, something that you'll check. Because sometimes funders have more funds than they expected. It happens. It doesn't happen often, but it does happen sometimes. And they might contact those who were not funded to offer funding at a later date. In fact, in our last grant round, we had one organization that scored kind of like right on the line where we run out of funding. And usually when that happens, we have at least a decent amount of funding left, but this time it was 75 bucks. So we ran out of funding. There's only $75 left. How are you going to put on a whole, this was a theatrical production for, um, 75 bucks. But we happen to have another organization that couldn't do all of the activities that they meant to do with their granted funds. And so they had funds left over. And so they returned those funds to us. And so we were able to re grant out those funds. And so once it came to the approval process with our board, the board approved that we would use more funds. And then it was more like $3,575 instead of just $75. So, um, that's an important thing to know. And if you had tuned in as that applicant to the grant review panel, you would have been like, "Ah, we're only going to get $75. We're not going to be able to do this on $75." But then when we contact you and say, hey, we can award you a partial award of much more than that. You have to be ready to get our email or our phone call or whatever it is. So, make sure you keep those connections. And especially if a funder is a good fit for you, or your organization, you want to build a relationship. I mean, that's a big part of getting granted is building a relationship with your funders. You can start building that relationship um, before you are granted. You're starting to build that relationship already by writing this application, by calling in and asking questions, by contacting this grantor and asking for comments. Um, those are parts of the ways that you learn as a grant writer, but also you build those important relationships with funders. Relationships are very important with funders. Some of the big funders are invitation only applications. You can't just open apply like our applications at Region 2 Arts Council or with the Minnesota State Arts Board. Many of the bigger corporate funders, especially in some of the big foundations, are invitation only. So you have to build a relationship with them before you can even apply. So, relationships are really important. So keep in touch with those funders, even if you weren't funded, because you might be funded next time and you want to build that relationship. So, number one, don't despair. Number two, see what you can learn. Number three, use the information you've already gathered. So, like we talked about before, earlier in this little monologue, like we're talking, I'm just talking at you. Um, but we did mention um, this idea that you've gathered all of this information, right? I mean, you've updated your artist resume or your artist bio, or you've gathered artist resumes and bios of all these vetted artists that you're going to utilize. You've gathered your work samples. You've gotten good pictures of your paintings, or you've gotten decent video of you playing your instrument, or whatever it is. Don't let those things go to waste. Um, Most arts grants have you pull together, all of these things: artist resume or bio, work samples, artist statement, and or maybe, if you're applying as an organization to fund an arts activity, you've pulled together information on available artists to do the work, a timeline, a budget. You're already planning this project. So don't let that information go to waste. Don't give up. Artists, visual artists, you can use the same information to apply to show your work in galleries, for shows, or in other venues, in museums. Maybe you're going to use this information to get in a catalog or a gift store, or maybe you're going to use some of this information to apply for that arts festival where you're going to sell your work. Um, Performing artists, you can use this info to apply to venues, musical or theatrical recruiters or agents. You know, And that's something that you can utilize this information for because they need the same information that funders do. Literary artists, you might be applying to a literary agent. They're going to need, work samples. They're going to need your resume or bio. Maybe you're using it to apply to an artist residency or a workshop or a conference or publishers or something like that. You can also use all of this information for marketing. Maybe you have a website, maybe you're writing a PSA for something. Maybe this is information that you can use for that interview that you're going to have on the radio, or that news article or your book jacket copy. I don't know, but there are lots of uses for this information. It's smart that you gathered it. You need to be able to talk about yourself as an artist, or if you're trying to get this arts activity funded, you need to have all this information about this arts activity to be able to put that to other people who might fund this. So, and for arts activities, organizations, you can use this info to apply with another funder for the same activity. You didn't get funded for this one. No harm, no foul. Move on to the next funder that might be able to fund this. Maybe there's a Minnesota State Arts Board grant that fits the bill, or maybe there's a more local funder like an electric or phone co-op, and maybe that's a smaller grant than you were going to get from us, but every little bit helps. Maybe you can get a little funding from over here and a little funding from over there and a little funding from over there. Even if you don't find another grant, you've made progress on planning this project. You have a budget, you have a timeline, you have vetted artists, contractors, volunteers, a fully realized idea. Run with that. Maybe a fundraising event, a gala, a car wash, I don't know. Maybe multiple funding sources, like I was saying, small grants, but maybe there's 3 small grants from the I don't know, whatever might work with your project. Maybe there's a small collaborative that really supports education for young children, and the arts activity you're doing is for young children. Maybe they'll pitch in some funds. Like I said, maybe a local public agency like a energy co-op or phone co-op might be interested in what you're doing because it's serving the public. Um, maybe local businesses or individuals want to donate. Maybe you want to go out and talk to some of them and get them to support what you're doing, with sponsorships or something like that. Maybe you're going to have some income coming in, so maybe you can defer some of the costs, like paying your people until the end when it's done, and you'll have had income from ticket sales or registration for the workshop or that type of thing. Maybe you can find another organization to partner with that you can split the costs with. Maybe there's somebody else who is trying to do something similar in the community and you can pool your resources. So, just because we didn't fund that project doesn't mean that that project is necessarily dead. Go find other resources. Go apply with other funders. Go chase this down. You've already done the hard part by doing the planning. So think about that. And that brings me back to fundraising. So, maybe you can raise the funds in another way. Maybe you can raise the funds you need on your own. If you're an artist trying to buy supplies, maybe you can budget 20 bucks a month to save up for when there's a sale on supplies or sale on that equipment that you need. Or maybe you want to take on a personal loan, if it's something that's urgent. Um, you said that you were going to supply, um, you know, uh, 20 beaded purses for some sort of project, and then your sewing machine conks out. It happens. Maybe you need to, put something on your credit card or get a personal loan or whatever it is to be able to fix that sewing machine, or to get a new sewing machine, whatever it is, so that you can have that inventory and you can fulfill that contract. It happens. So there are other things that you might be able to do, especially if, you have an urgent need. And maybe that's not something that you can do. Maybe you don't have a credit card. Maybe, you don't have a bank that's going to offer you a personal loan. Maybe you can set up a GoFundMe site. Maybe, if you're the right kind of artist, maybe a Patreon, where people kind of subscribe, to find out what you're doing and those types of things. Maybe that would work for you. If you're an organization trying to find arts programming or arts event funding, maybe look to local partners, like we talked about businesses for sponsorships, fundraising events, to get individuals and corporate sponsors, or applying to other funders. Those things are still out there. And remember, I guess the thing I want to leave you with is remember the name of the game in grants funding is persistence. Keep writing those grant applications. Keep improving, keep becoming a better grant writer, keep building those relationships with funders and collaborators. Um, that's important. That's the important part. Um, you know, if you don't apply for the grant, you won't get the grant. You 100% will not get that grant if you don't apply. If you do apply, there's some percentage of a chance that you're going to get that grant. Maybe it's a 50% chance. Maybe it's an 80% chance, if you've done like really good research and this funder really fits for what you're trying to do. But, there is a chance if you apply. There is no chance, absolutely no chance that you're going to get funded if you don't apply. So, remember that. It is taking a chance and it is, um, you know, putting in a lot of work. It is. I'm not saying that grant writing is easy. It's not. Um, but you don't have a chance of getting the funding at all if you don't apply. If you do apply, then there is a chance. And yes, it's work, but sometimes that work really pays off and you're able to do that thing that you wanted to do. You're able to get that equipment that you really need, that you can't afford on your own. Um, Persistence is important. Um, I've known artists who have had a hard time, applying and applying and applying and not getting something. And it can be tough. It can be a hard hit to your self-esteem. But as we talked about at the beginning, do not despair. Often it has nothing to do with you or your art and has to do with some of those other issues that we talked about. So, you know, try and be persistent and try and keep applying. I know some artists who have applied multiple times and been denied. And then finally it was their time and they got a bigger grant than they even expected. Um, because, they knocked it out of the park that time. And it was just the perfect right time for what they were trying to fund and what they had applied for. And and they had improved in their grant writing as well. So, persistence is really important. I know it can be hard because it is disheartening when you don't get a grant, and I do understand that. Um, but I'm here to tell you that the people who get funded are the people who persevere and they keep writing applications. They are the ones that get funded. So, it's important um, to keep writing those applications and remember to avail yourself of the help that's out there. Most funders will help you write an application, at least in some way. Often they have really good learning materials for you. Often, they have people on staff who are there to answer questions when you don't understand part of their application. They have often accommodations that they can offer you. So if there's something that is difficult for you to do, maybe you have really bad tendonitis or arthritis is very difficult for you to type. So you need help with that. They might have somebody who, does that. If, your screen reader or something doesn't work with their application very well, there's accommodations that can be made. So if you need accommodation, do not be shy and ask that funder about that. And if they don't offer accommodation for you, well, then, they're not a good funder. Let them go. Don't waste time on funders who aren't a good fit for you. And do spend time, researching funders that are a good fit. So let me share my screen here for a second. Um, and let's go to the Region 2 Arts Council website. So if you go to our website and go to grants information, and go to grant services, you can see the services that we provide people um, for, grants and things like that. That other funders also have those kinds of services. So, be aware of that. And let's see. Yeah, that's grant services again. So anyway, you can find more information out there if you need it. And there's lots of information on our website that's here to help you, and to help you apply, um, you know, for our um opportunities, and other funders have those things as well. So, research on people's websites and find the things that you need to find the funders that best fit what you do, and who you are, and the activity that you're trying to do. Those things are out there. So, and do not hesitate to contact me or other um, funders, staff, for help. So, anyway, that's my pep talk for today. So, don't despair if you didn't get that grant. Please try again. We're here to help, and we want you to be successful, and we are behind you to help. So, please remember that and contact us if you need, and we're rooting for you. So thanks for watching this video, and good luck on your next grant application.